Good morning, Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1448. We learned yesterday was essentially an explanation of the Likutei Torah in Hazinu, Kinesher Yoyer, the revelation during Matan Torah and the Beis Hamikdash was the Gili of Atzilus. What does that mean? That Atzilus is a revelation of the divine unity within all the details. So what's prominent and what dominates is that vision, the divine vision. And that's why there's a Gili not through Mamutzayim. It doesn't come through intermediaries and through filters. It comes the way it is. So there is an Atzilus, there are spheres, even compared it to Akudim, like 10 energies, but it's all like in one entity. In Akudim, it's one container. In Atzilus, it's 10 containers and 10 energies, but it's all seen as one we'll call it indivisible unit. That's what it's. He gave the example of a human being. So we have the faculties that they're separate faculties, the power to see, the power to hear. But the root, in Chachma and Bina, the root, there's actually an interconnectivity between the two. So in regular functions, sight and sound are two separate faculties. Yes, but Pnimis, he said, they're bound together. But in their root, where they originate from, they're encompassed one in another. Like Chachma is encompassed in Bina and Chachma. Bina is in Chachma and Chachma and Bina. Now, if that's the case with a human being, a human being below, that there's a difference between the root and that which branches out of the root, that in the root things are united. And when outside they're separate, so we can understand from this also in Atzilus, that Chachma and Bina Atzilus, their Chachma is not a Metzias and Bina is not a Metzias, as separate entities. They're all part of that one indivisible core entity. And that's why by Matan Torah, when the Atzilus was shining, they saw the sounds and they heard the sights. Because sight and sound were they had experienced how they are in their root. And there they overlap. They interconnect. And the same is, that same revelation was time of the Beis Hamikdash without any intermarriage. But in Golus, so you have the Shechina to Yecheskel, Golu Lebavel, Golu Shechina Imahem, the Shechina is with them, but that's already the level of Malchus. So it comes through the levels, it comes through Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher. That's why you saw the divine through the lens of the Merkavah. So by the Beis Hamikdash, the neshamas were on a higher level, and they saw the kolos achai is the general picture of the uniting and general divine energy within everything, the etzem of Atzilus. But in Bavel and Golus, they only saw through Malchus, and through that comes the flow from Machal and Gabriel, the flow of Av and Yira, through the Malachim Yitzavlach, okay, the Malachim that are serve as those intermediaries. And that's what we concluded. So you've now tied up everything he discussed in the last 2 pages about Yecheskel, the distinction between Yecheskel, the Navi, who's already in Golus, and that was in the time of the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, and the time of Matan Torah. I'm going to continue on at the bottom of page 1448. A few things that need to be pointed out here now. Number one, if you recall, there's a long discussion going on here now. It all began long way back, but this part, last section, was that the neshamas received their avir through the malachim. They're like the mailmen. They deliver it. And that's the hine anechi shelach malach, the matat, malach matat. But in the process, we've been learning also, as I pointed out, the historical different states of divine revelation throughout history. So now we just talked about Matan Torah and the time of the Beis Hamikdash. and contrasting that to Golus Yecheskel. Earlier, we spoke about the days of Moshe Rabbeinu and the days of Yeshua. But he also mentioned the Avos. On page 1447, if you recall, he brought that the Avon, the Avos, they were able to also see a deeper level. And yet he distinguished it from Moshe. What's the difference in Moshe and the Avos? I'm reading from page 1447 because he's going to go back now to that. That by Moshe saw everything through a transparent like glass. There was no filter at all. The Avos, he said, was aspaklari hameira. He slaps aspaklari meira basapaklari she'ena meira. So a certain transparent energy, but then it went through a filter. Aspaklari she'ena meira, what we call translucent. And then he said the Nevi'im, the other prophets, there was only aspaklari she'ena meira. So it's three different levels. He said the comprehension of Neshamas Yisrael in the time of Moshe and the Zman of Beis Hamikdash by Ascension was like the level of the Avos. So now he's going to go back to the Avos in the new paragraph here at the bottom of page 1448 and elaborate more on this little section. Now, we do want to point out that in volume 1 in Ayin Beis, the second half, is a big part of it, was that the difference between the Avos and Matan Torah. He spoke about that. Avos, of course, were before Matan Torah. They were a high level, but they didn't receive the Torah. And he explained that Matan Torah was a Echad, a new unprecedented energy, Bligvul, entered into existence. Where the Avos, they basically were cleaning up the pipes that were polluted through the Chatoim, the sins after the Chet Eitzadas. Like he speaks in Basel Legani too. So they returned to Shekhinah as it was in Gan Eden before the sin. So that's why what was revealed to them was Kel Shaddai. Shaddai comes from the word Dai. He speaks there many interpretations of Shaddai, but Shaddai means the divine. That's Dai means it's a limited divine flow. The power of Er HaGvul. Whereas by Matan Torah, Moshe, Matan Torah was revealed Havayah, Bligvul. So the ideas we're talking about here are connected back to volume 1, which is all part of the interface, of course. Because once the Avos, so-called, cleaned up the pipes and reclaimed the divine energy that was meant to be allocated to existence, the pipes got corroded and blocked up and clogged. Then comes a new Chodesh Matan Torah. The same thing will be lost at love. When Mashiach comes, the same idea. After we finish our work of removing the toxins and removing the pollutants and the dissonance and the disconnects that comes from all the different transgressions, then will come a whole new Echad, even greater than Matan Torah. So all this is really connected to the whole picture of the purpose of existence as it's executed and implemented in this world, which of course is the ultimate interface between God and existence. Dira b'tachtein. So he's going to go now back to that discussion about Avos. So he says, Vihine, bottom of page 1448, last two lines. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says, Vihine, and now this bar li'il was explained earlier on page 1447, previous page. The ba'avos hayigili b'chinas aspakleda hameira alidei aspaklada she'ena meira. That the ba'avos, there was a gili of aspaklaya hameira through aspaklaya she'ena meira. Aspaklaya is a glass. Aspaklaya means like a schuchis, a glass. Now we know you could have a totally transparent glass. You could have a mirror. You put silver on the back, and the glass is totally not transparent. You only see yourself. Famous story with the Maral. You put money, silver, on the back of a glass, you don't see others, you see yourself. But there's also levels in between. You could have a glass that's a clouded glass. You could have a glass that is not so clouded, more clouded. You could have an opaque glass. Not a mirror, but a glass that just blocks out all the light. So these are used as examples for different levels of revelation. Moshe was known that he saw the divine aspaklai hameira. Meira means illuminated, essentially transparent. Aspaklai she'ena meira means it's not illuminated, it means it's not as transparent. But then there's something in between. Because you could ask the question, either it's transparent or not transparent. How could you say, because we're not talking physical, we're talking there's an element of the light coming through, but then it was filtered through Aspaklaya Sheinamir. When you talk about the other prophets, there was no Aspaklaya Mir altogether. They only see it through the cloud. So in other words, the others had something in between, basically, is what you would say. So he's going back to that line that he mentioned, as I said, that was there on page 1447. The Hainu, what does this mean? Shayideh HaMalchus. They received it through Malchus. It wasn't straight Zah. You recall earlier we were speaking that when Moshe Rabbeinu got Havaya Atzmei, straight from Zah, the moon, when it receives from the sun, there are many levels. And we learned there's the highest level, the sixth level, which is a high level, which we discussed earlier in the parentheses. That's when the moon is like a full moon. So it's on the same stature as the sun, but it's still receiving from the sun. But then there's the moon when it's lower than the sun. And it's basically in a state of Merkavah. That's when Malchus is receiving. So he says, by the Avos, when you say that their Gili was a translucent one through a transparent one, that means it came through Malchus. Similar to what he said before, but Malchus has many levels. What does that mean? You could have Malchus as it is Natzilus. You could have Malchus as it is Matat in Bria or Yetzira, which is in the time of Golos. Like time of Yeshua, for example, that's already Malchus as from Atzilus as it's descending and radiating into Bria. So he's saying about the Avos, he's clarifying what level this is. That means their revelation of Zah, of Havaya, of Atzilus, came through Malchus. So they had Atzmus of Atzilus, but it came through Malchus. I'll just give an example to make things a little more understandable. Let's take an example of a teacher and student. So when a student is at a very high level, obviously the teacher needs less filters and less examples, and it can be very transparent. The teacher can speak and teach, and the student receives it all. He's still a teacher, and he's still a mashpia, and this is a makabel. But the makabel is very close to being able to hear the teacher with almost no filters. Let's say no filters altogether. A top-level student. Another student, we'll go to the other extreme, then we'll go in something in between. Another student, no, that's not the case at all. The teacher has to bring it down into many examples. Not only that, he may need an assistant who will take what the teacher says and distill it even further, like you'll see. You could have a master teacher, and then there are teachers on a lower level who are taking what the master teacher said and translating it, so to speak, not just translating language, but translating into the language of a completely different entity, a completely lower entity, like a translator. So there, you not only have a filter, you have actually a mamutza. You have someone that's in between the teacher and the student. And then you could have a student who's receiving from the teacher, directly from the teacher, but the teacher needs to put some filters in order to explain it to the student. So I would say these three examples, these three states, is a difference between Moshe, the Avos, and the Nevi'im in general. Moshe is like hearing it straight from Zah, from Havaya Atzmei, as high as it goes. He spoke to Hashem, said Ponim B'Ponim, as we learned. The Avos are hearing it from Atzilus Atzmei, but it's through Malchus. Meaning Atzilus itself, Zah, is filtering it through Malchus, but it's still Atzilus Atzmei. The Nevi'im is already in Bria and Yetzirah and the lower levels. There, they have to hear it now through, so to speak, through a malach, through a mamutza. So you could hear it, so Atzilus itself can be revealed in its pure, pristine form, unfiltered, filtered, and then there's another level when it goes through Bria, through the malachim. So he's saying the Avos is coming through Malchus, so they have Atzmus Atzilus, but that's coming through Malchus. There's not malchus as it's in Bria. This is malchus as it's in Atzilus. So it's a high level, but it's still malchus. So here we see that this is it's not as high level as Moshe himself, but it's a higher level than what we receive in Golus, because you don't have a malach involved here. It's coming from Atzilus itself, but it's going through. That's why by the Avos you don't say they saw it through a Merkavah, like Yecheskel saw it through the lens of the chariot, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher. But Avos you don't say that. But at the same time, the Avos is Shaddai, like we said, not Avaya. So it's coming through Malchus, and that's the Aspaklaya Me'ira through the Aspaklaya She'ena Me'ira. But it's all within Atzil. It's somewhat similar to Yeshua. Yeshua was already in Bria because he became now a leader, but he's receiving from the Malach, but he said Matat as he's from Atzilus. That's why Yeshua responded to him, because he was drawing from the way Yeshua was once a student of Moshe. I mean, he always remained a student, but when he was completely connected. I can't say it's exactly the same level, but it somewhat has some similarities. And then there's like Yecheskel, or in general in Golus, where there you're receiving it through a mamutza, the malach. And that's not what he's going to explain. And he's now going to explain yet another level, which we didn't address yet. We talked about Moshe, talked about Yeshua, we talked about Matan Torah, we talked about Beis Hamikdash, we talked about Golus, we talked about the Avos. What about the Shevatim, the 12 Shevatim? Where do they stand in this whole picture? So when we go away from this, we're going to come away that basically all the different stages in the Torah, starting from the Avos all the way through all of them, are going to be covered in understanding this whole, like I said, panorama of different states of revelation. So what you're getting here is really a very pretty comprehensive picture of literally every level, whether you're talking about a Navi, in Golus, not Golus, Yeshua, Moshe, and now he's going to talk about the Shevatim, the tribes. Now we know they're the children of Yaakov. So to say they're the Avos, they're not the Avos, but they're Shevatim. So, but they're a very high level of revelation as well. So we're now going to understand where does the Shevatim fit into this picture. That's what we're going to learn next as we go to the next page. Okay. Any questions? I mean, only there are 2 lines, but basically he went back to the Avos, and now he's going to go to the Shevatim. One introduction to make it a little easier. You may recall we learned earlier that there's 2 levels in the Merkavah. Merkavah Ilaah and Merkavah Tataah. That was a few pages back. Merkavah Ilaah, Merkavah Tataah. I don't remember what page it was on. I believe it was when he spoke about maybe Kudsha Bricha V'Shchinta. I think it was on page 1437, but maybe not. Okay. So let's learn inside. So we continue now. I'm going to the next page, 1449. So he says, Umadrega Sanal. Now that we've established where the Avos are, he says, Umadrega Sanal. Umadrega Hanal. Page 1449. And the level discussed earlier, which level? Shashpoya de Malachim. That the transmission comes through the angels. They're like the mailmen, the delivery, the distributors. Zeu shamshachi b'madregas hashvatim. That's the amshacha, which is the level of the shvatim, the tribes. So now he's going to explain what the shvatim, which is one step below the Avos. The hine, because now the ha'avos ho'yibchinas markavte Ilaah. We know the Avos hein Merkavah. That's what it says. Or in Tanya, many places from the Medrash, that the Avos themselves were a Merkavah. They were like a chariot, which means they were completely dedicated to being a vehicle for the divine presence in this world. That's the Avos. It's called Merkavte Ilaah, supernal, the higher Merkavah. Bechinas chagas d'Atzilus. Chesed Gvura Tiferes of Atzilus. Avram is Chesed. Yitzchak is Pachad Yitzchak Gvura. And Yaakov is Tiferes. So these three levels, that's what the Avos were on earth. It says in Sefer HaBoyer, Chassidus brings it that once Avram came to this world, Chesed of Atzilus said to Hashem, what do you need me for? You have a walking Chesed on earth right now. So, because he embodied and personified Chesed of Atzilus on earth. That's Avram. Same thing with Yitzchak and Yaakov. So they're called Merkavah Ilaah, the Merkavah of Atzilus. Not the Merkavah of Yecheskel, not the Merkavah of Bria, Yetzirah. They are the level of the Merkavah of Atzilus.
But yeah, we say he received from Malchus of Atzilus.
And like he explained before, that they are not the level of Moshe, but they're the level of Merkavah of Atzilus, because everything is in Atzilus, even if it's coming through Malchus of Atzilus. Lies, being, Shahayi b'chinas bitl mamish, because they were in a state of utter bitl, utter nullification, utter suspension of self. Utter b'chinas bitl mamish, al kain. Therefore, hoyameir behem eiratzilus mamish. So what radiated in them, what shined in them, is mamish atzilus. Yes, he said before through malchus, but still it's atzilus itself. Without, like I said, straight from the teacher. They didn't need an assistant of the teachers to explain it to them. The Eid Sof u'midesav yizbarach. Heim hamizgalim benafsham. Eid Sof, the very divine, infinite, and midesav yizbarach, and God's attributes of love, gvura, strength or discipline, tiferes, compassion, heim hamizgalim benafsham. That was what was revealed in their nefesh. Basically, as I said, they were an embodiment, personification, a reincarnate, you could say, of chagas of Atzilus. V'hu inyan Avram Oyavi, and that's the meaning when we say Avram Oyavi, my beloved, the one who loves me. Upachad Yitzchak, pachad is like vura, the reverence, the pachad of Yitzchak. That's what they embodied. Val Yodam. Nimshach li is gili and so b'chlal neshamis Yisrael b'chinas gili. And it wasn't just for them. Through them was drawn the gili of Ein Sof in general, neshamis Yisrael in the state of gili. So the Avos play a role. That's why we learn about the Avos and Tataah. It's not just past history. They are the channels of chagas of Atzilus to the closest neshamis Yisrael. So that's why we say we have a Avram within us. The Medrash says a person should always strive. A person should say, my actions should be like the actions of the Avos. So we say, Maisa Avos similar bonim. The actions of the patriarchs are a siman, are a guide, are a direction, and also give us power. Empowers the children. V'hainu, which means that through the Avos comes lias hadas v'akoda belakus ki'ilu roya. That through them comes the ability to have the recognition, the perception, and the recognition and godliness as if we see it. That comes from us, with the Avos give us the power to achieve. That's the Avos. However, loikol nefesh tuchel se'ez gilizeh. Not every soul has the capacity to contain this type of gili. This is a high-level gili from the Avos. Not everyone has the capacity. Like we learned earlier, in general, the neshama says it comes down below, is in the body and the animal soul, so that they block the divine soul from radiating purely. If we didn't have a body and animal soul, so neshama could have a direct connection. But the fact is, we do manifest in this existence. And when you add Golus into the picture, it just adds to the concealment. So, but he's saying, "Nach kol nefesh tuchel se'ez gilui zeh," can contain this gilui. Like I gave the example, not everybody can get directly from the teacher, even through Malchus, even with examples, because it's a very high level. So that's why came the next generation, that Yaakov had the Shevatim. In order for that to have Gilead, every Yisrael, that every Jew, no matter who, should be able to receive this revelation, who are the Shvatim. That's through the Shevatim. Their Shevatim are like branches. It's actually the name of Shevatim. Shevet means tribe, but also means branch. Matter of fact, this week's Parsha, Mates. So Mates is another name for Shevet. A tribe, but also means a branch. So like he said before, there's a Shadish, there's the root, and there's the branch. So now comes the Shevatim, Shehem Bechinas Merkavah Tataah. They're called, and they're the level of the lower Merkavah. It's still a Merkavah. They were also dedicated to God, but now it's a lower Merkavah. Bechinas Ayin Beis Boker de Bria. This refers to the 12 cattle in Bria. That's what the pasuk with we learned by Shlomo HaMelech. Matter of fact, that's where he spoke about. Now I recall, we spoke about the Sheresh. I'm looking at top of page 1429. He brought the Ayin Beis Boker. If you look in the top of the page, that came through the Malachim. Yeah, he said Ayin Beis Boker de Bria. So he explained there the pasuk Hamamei, where he said that when he said Boker, Ayin Beis Boker imayam ha'emed aleim. That's 13. He mentions it on top of page 1429. So this is the level of Ayin Beis Boker. Now we're already in Bria, not Atzilus. It's still a Merkavah, but it's now called the lower level of Merkavah. Shu in Bittul Hayesh. This is Bittul Hayesh. What's Bittul Hayesh? It's also Bittul. But before the line 2, you see, he called it Bittul Mamish, sometimes called Bittul Mimitzias. Bittul Hayesh means that the ego is subdued. But it's not total, utter transparency. There is an entity, a yesh, but this yesh is dedicated to God. So when you say Merkavah Ilaah, you're talking about, just to use an example, Alter Rebbe Rab Hillel Paracha. So it says the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab speaks in Torah Shalom. He says the Alter Rebbe on Friday afternoon, he would fall asleep. He would begin to feel drowsy naturally. Why? Because Lamaila, before Shabbos enters, the whole world's going to what's called the Mittah de Zah. Zah goes into a type of slumber or sleep in order to be renewed for Shabbos. So it's like everything. There's a certain withdrawal, like the moon wanes and disappears before it's reborn. Or before Rosh Hashanah, we say a similar idea. So the Alter Rebbe was Bedugma Shalamayla, meaning he lived in this world, but he was aligned to the forces above, so he would drowse off for a short period of time. Rab Hillel, it said, would go for a nap. He didn't naturally feel it, but he knew that's a time of so-called spiritual slumber, so he went, I'm going to take a small nap before Shabbos. What's the difference? So the difference is, one is it. He is aligned, his very gut, he feels it in his whole being. And Rabbi Hillel knew about it, so he dedicated. The rest of us are on neither of those two levels. So the difference in Bittul Mitzias means a total transparent channel, a vehicle for a lakus. Bittul Yesh means there's a yesh, but the yesh, through work, has aligned itself to what God wants. It takes more effort, more exertion, and it's not an utter total bittul. You could say somewhat like the difference between the tzaddik and the beinoni in Tanya, where he says that tzaddik doesn't even have to make an effort because his animal soul was completely eliminated. The beinoni has to constantly, even during davening, has to overpower and exert himself to make sure that he's control over the animal soul. Just as an example, not exactly, but al derech. So this is the level of Bittul Yesh. In Tataah, Vayashkan Lo Babeka, that's in Parshas Vayetze. So the Tataah discusses this. I want to look it up to see if the language here is, I think the language comes from there. Ponim, what do you see from this? That there are two levels. There's the Merkavah law of the Avos, Kafta Tov the Shevatim. So the Avos generally Mamshich, Chagas, Chesugur Tiferes, and to close Neshamis Yisrael, but not every Nefesh can receive it in its pure, undiluted way. So that's why the Gilish should reach everyone. It comes through the branches, the Shevatim, Merkavah Tataah, that carry the energy to all l'chol nefesh mi Yisrael, l'chol Yisrael. So based on this, well, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. He's now going to talk about, is this the same level as the Malachim? That's the question. It would seem to be similar to the level of Malachim, but he's going to distinguish. So if you have a question about that, I would just wait. He's going to discuss this now. But if you want any explanation, any clarity about what we learned till now, if anybody has any questions.
Well, we learned that now we're saying with the two levels of the Merkavah, but I always thought that the higher one was Bria and the lower one was Yetzirah. Now it's saying the lower one is Bria. Did I get it mixed up?
I'm not sure where you're talking about other Maimarim that you learned.
Yes.
There's levels, there's constant levels. I mean, there's the Merkavah here of Atzilus. That's the Avos are the Merkavah within Atzilus. But it's not the Merkavah they're looking at. They were the Merkavah. When you're talking about the Merkavah that you're talking about, like Yecheskel or the other Merkavahs that the Nevi'im saw a chariot, they didn't see the Avos. They saw the chariot as it's reflected in Bria or Yetzirah. What is introduced here is the Merkavah, the higher Merkavah of the Avos themselves, being that chariot.
All right, thank you.
Remember, Merkavah simply means a chariot. There are many levels of a Merkavah. Okay. So now the question is, how does this contrast to Malachim? Now we're saying it's not coming straight from Atzilus, it's coming through the Shevatim. So what is the story? How does that relate to what we've been discussing about the angels? V'yesh lemer, Rabbi Rashab adds, v'yesh lemer, we can say, Sham shachash adei Shevatim, that the transmission that comes through the tribes, hi l'mayla mam shachash adei malachim, is higher than the transmission that comes through the angels. Shahari Merkavah the Shevatim, because the chariot of the Shevatim, the lower chariot, Mavur, it's explained by Bir Dvanina Sati, in the Bir Dvanina Sati, which most likely could be the Tataah, or maybe that some Tzedek explaining it. I have to look it up. But he's citing a Maimer here. What does he say? He says that the Merkavah of the Shevatim, it says there, Shezeu ha'oras hatzilus shanimshach lebriya. That this is a reflection of Atzilus that transmits and is drawn into Bria. Ubechibar Atzilus ima Bria nasa b'bchinas Merkavah. And the joining of Atzilus and Bria, the Shevatim that is, nasa b'bchinas Merkavah. It's achieved, and that creates the Merkavah of the Shevatim. The Avos is only Atzilus. It's not Bria. But the Shevatim is a bridge, essentially, that connects Atzilus and Bria. That's what it says in the Maimer. He's coming to make the case that the Shevatim are higher than the Malachim. Let's see how. Okay. In his boil, and it was explained earlier, Shazel Madrega Shvi'ah. Yeah. That's called the seventh level. He quoted a Zoyar that the seventh level, Shemischaber Habriya im Atzilus. There's the seventh level, if I recall correctly, I think he connected it to Malchus and Bina, that joins Shemischaber Habriya im Atzilus. That binds together Bria with Atzilus. Im kain, if that's the case, harizel lamaila b'madregas hamalachim. So therefore, it's higher than the level of the angels. Shehein madregas biyah atzmon, because the angels are the level of biyah. Whether it's the srafim in bria, or the chayis hakodesh in yitzira, or the efanim in asiyah, they're not natsilas. They're in the biyah. Here we're talking about the Shevatim are like a bridge between Atzilus and Bria. We still have to understand about Matat, because he did say Matat is drawing from Atzilus into Bria too. But in general, the angels are in Bria itself. So that's a proof that the Shevatim are higher. So you have the Avos, you have the Shevatim, and you have the Malachim. And then you have Moshe, which is even higher than the Avos. Aspaklaya Me'ira. Total transparency of Zah. Because the Avos, it's still Zah through Malchus. Okay. What I would say about Matat, unless he's going to explain it, is that Matat is, among the angels, is unique. Because he's the head, the supervisor, if you remember, the king of all the Malachim. So, and he did say Matat is a Matat, remember 2 levels of Matat, like he's the Nar, 2 levels of the Nar, as he is in Atzilus, and as he comes into Biyah. And he said, Matat, that come to Yeshua, he said clearly, is the way he's coming to Yeshua, is coming from Atzilus. So you have to say Matat may be similar to the level of the Shevatim, based on that. This I'm speculating. He doesn't say this explicitly, but just to reconcile everything we've been learning. But the Malachim in general is definitely the level of Biyah. Okay. So therefore, when in time of Golus, even though Shevatim already draw it down more than the Avos, time of Golus, you need also the Malach, the Malachim, as we learned earlier, just to tie it together. But he's not finished yet. So now he's going to explain what all this is in Aveda. But let me stop if anybody has any questions.
Rabbi, is the Hebrew word matat, which means tribes, and it's related to this week's Parsha, is it spelled the same way as the angel?
No. It's not nothing to do with it. Matat is mem tes tes. Mata is mem tes hey. Matat is short for the word we don't pronounce it, but matat is short if you remember.
Right.
The entire word is mem tes tes reish vav nun.
Right.
Okay. It's not related at all.
Thank you.
Maybe. Listen, I don't recall a connection. Definitely not here. Maybe
right.
I don't think there's a connection.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Why would Yeshua need matat when he learned his actual influencer was directly from sitting at the feet of Moshe Rabbeinu?
So why don't you look there's a whole explanation on page 1444 and 1445, because that's after Moshe's passing. Yeshua went down into Bria, and that's lower than when he was. There's a whole discussion that he's lower. When he became a leader, he now is no longer standing in front of Moshe. That's why he receives from the Malach, because the Malach draws back, like basically reconnects him to the Moshe as he was once. That's what he explains explicitly on page 1444 and 1445.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Okay. Now keep in mind, this is all not anything. This is all direct link, directly the essential theme of Ayin Beis, which is interface. These are all different levels of interfaces. That's really what the underlying point here is. So now he's going to explain what this is in Avodah. What does this mean in our Avodah, in our work? Uba Avodah, and Avodah, what are these levels? Hinebeza madregas, the Avos and Shevatim, the 2 levels of the Avos and Shevatim in our Avodah, because it still begs, so what do we get from the Avos and what do we get from the Shevatim? If we need the Shevatim because we're not all on that level to receive from the Avos, so what do we need the Avos for? it's coming through the Shevatim. So obviously the answer is because the Shevatim themselves are receiving from the Avos. It's all one channel. So just like when Moshe has students who teach more students, it's still connecting all to the original teacher. But he's now going to explain what is the difference between the Aveda of the Avos, and Aveda of the Shevatim. So he says in Aveda, this is the difference between them. The two levels of Avos, one who Ayin Beis bechinas Mesiras nefesh the Echad. Remember, we're talking all about Echad. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hamayirich be'Echad, Yichud Kudshe Bricha V'Shchinta. It's all talking about that element of integration and unity. So he says, there's the two levels. When we say Echad, it says Nimsa Nafshi be'Echad. That one dedicates, gives their life when they say Echad. It's a form of Mesiras nefesh, of giving your whole life to God. So he says these are the two levels of Mesiras nefesh: the Echad u'b'chol Nafshecho. Echad we say in Shema, and then in V'ahavta we say b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. Remember, b'chol nafshecha means with all your nefesh, Mesiras nefesh. So what's the difference between Mesiras nefesh of Echad, Mesiras nefesh of Nafshecha? So he's going to explain now that difference. Now that was I recall when we learned that I may have mentioned, maybe I didn't mention it, but it begs the question. Limser nafshi be'echad, and then we talked b'chol nafshecha, ad shetei, till the nefesh leaves him, if you remember. The level of bina, talked about it a while back. Let me just point out where it was discussed. Here we are. By the way, the Avos and Merkavah and the Shevatim was on page 1425. Yeah. Yechayin Ilaah and Chayin Tataah. Avos and Merkavah, and Tataah is the Machshkin and Merkavah Tataah. Yeah, that's where it was. If you want to just see the link and the connection. Okay, so there was a piece I was just referring to in Bina. Was let me take you back to where that is. I think it's on. Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, on page 1411, he spoke about Mesiras nefesh b'chol Nafshecho. Afilu hu neitles Nafshecho, the level of who. But now he's going to discuss the difference between b'chol Nafshecho and Echad, and Mesiras nefesh of Echad. That's the difference in Aveda between the Avos and the Shevatim. So he explains. The Mesiras nefesh, the Echad, the Mesiras nefesh, when you say Echad, Hashem Echad, Hu ba'atzmus ein sof shelamaylam b'chinas gilui. That's what we're talking about, the Achdus, that we learned about, the highest level, Hamayirich be'Echad, when we climb all the way to the top. In Atzmus ein sof, that's higher than revelation. Higher than Oyer. It means it's the Oyer as it's attached to its source. And that's why you're not feeling the connection, you're not feeling the revelation of the divine, you're feeling the very core. And the feeling is that he alone and there's no other. Complete absorption in the etzem. That's Mesiras nefesh of Echad. U'kamoy kain b'neshama. That's the level of Echad. The same thing. The neshama. When the neshama says Echad, what is the neshama feeling? Shenigash ba ha'atzmus. It's feeling the core essence. V'yidezehi mizbateles b'bchinas asmis ein sof. And by feeling and sensing that, Atzmus completely apart from us, as we learned earlier. Complete transcendence. He's misbateles, completely nullified to this level of Atzmus Ein Sof. Like he writes in the Maimer Tzena the Ena, that is Shir Hashirim, Likutei Torah Shir Hashirim. In the first drush, in the first Maimer, Be'inyan Su Yedechem, the Mesiras Nefesh Be'echad Hu. So he talks about Su Yedechem, lift your arms. So he says, Mesiras Nefesh Be'echad. What is that? Who said Tishapech? Nafshecho is B'telev and Nichlalas Be'erein Sof. That he's transformed his Nefesh to be completely nullified. To be nullified and encompassed, absorbed in Erein Sof, umiyuchedes b'matzila baruch hu, and united with its emanator, blessed be He, k'moshehesha kodim sheyarda, like the soul was before it came down below. So it's basically a total absorption to its source, as it was when it first started the journey, before the soul came down altogether.
V'hu
inyan Yichuda Ilaah. That's Yichuda Ilaah. And we learned about Yichuda Ilaah, Yichuda Tataah. The Yichuda Ilaah is the vision from above, that there's only one Yesh Amiti, Atzmus. Everything else is a novelty. Bitla Yesh or Yichuda Tataah means there's an existence, and the existence is relating to the divine that relates to existence. But here we're talking about the divine that does not relate to beyond existence. That's the Mesiras Nefesh of Echad, which is like the level of the Avos. Uba'agos, he continues, brings more sources. So far, he's brought two Maimorim, I see. One is the Maimer of the Maimer that he brought from 3.4 Maimorim, but the Maimer that he brought was from Vayashkim Lovim Babeker, actually 4 Maimorim. Then the Biur of Anina Sati, then Sena Rena, and I was going to bring a fourth Maimer. Ubagos, this is most likely the Tzemach Tzedek, in the gloss, in the commentary of L'dibra Masl B'chofei B'kiflev, the Maimer Chanukah, in Torah Vayeshev. What does he say there? He says, Shezeu abitl b'chinas antu chad. It's an expression, antu chad, you are one, v'lei b'chuzban, not measurable. That this is the highest level of bitl antu chad. That's the Mesiras Nefesh of Echad. Now comes, what about b'chol nafshecho? Then you say, v'haftas Hashem elekecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecho. How is that different than the Mesiras Nefesh of Echad? So he says now like this. Ubachol nafshecha, the second level, hu mehizbonnus, that comes from the contemplation. Now you're not focusing on the total true reality of Atzmos. You're focusing on existence. And what are you coming to conclude with your contemplation? That everything in existence is only a reflection of the divine. That comes, only a reflection from God, from God. He says in Shar Yichud V'Amuna, second section in Tanya, chapter 4, that all of existence is really non-existent as an independent entity. It's really like the reflection of the sun within the sun. Just like sunlight. You see the sunlight on earth. You come to realize that the sunlight originates from the light within the sun, and there's completely it's only a reflection of the sun.
We lost you for the past 30, 40 seconds. You broke up a lot.
Okay. What was the last thing you heard that was clear?
The Ziva Shemesh, that the ray of the sun is encompassed in the sun.
So what does he say in Tanya? That all of existence, even though we see it as an existence because of the Tzimtzum, but in truth, it's like the light of the sun. And from the light of the sun, you come to realize that light compared to the sun is completely bottled, completely nullified. What is the light compared to the actual sun? So he says there, it's like bottle mitzis, kamei ziva shemesh b'shemesh, like the reflection of the sun, the rays of the sun within the sun. V'al kein hayesh bottle b'tachlis. And therefore the yesh is utterly nullified. But this is a very different type of bittul. Before the bittul was, there's no existence altogether. The focus is there's only one reality, atzmos. Like he says, hu levade ben zolase. Now in Yehuda Tataah, which is what we're learning now, in B'chol Nafshecho, there is an existence. And you contemplate and realize the existence is completely just a reflection of the divine. And that leads to a bottle betachlis, he quotes again that same maimer, that also the yesh, not just that total nullification, the yesh itself of existence should be bottled, should be nullified, v'nichel, and encompassed. Also, Neidin Baruch Hu b'kiyum eitzim einov Mereus bara ubishmirosam emachshava v'irhurim shalei laHashem heima v'lei sasura achla levavchem. In other words, the first level of bittul doesn't address our animal soul. It doesn't address the yesh. It's just completely recognizing that there's one reality, God, Echad. Here, we're focusing from the perspective of existence. That existence too should recognize that it doesn't have any Mesiras of its own. So in other words, it's coming more commensurate to our being. And what does this abundance lead to? Let's read again. Is that also the yesh is bottled and nichel and sof. What does that mean? Bekiyum. Eitzemein of Mereis bara. That by fulfilling that, he should seal his eyes from looking at anything evil, upishmirasan, and protect himself from any thoughts or inadvertent thoughts shaloi laHashem heima, that are not directed toward godliness, and should not follow after their heart, after the impulses or the whims of the heart. That doesn't exist b'chol nafshecho. In Echad, you're completely just completely suspending yourself, completely absorbed by the etzem. Here, it's a focus on the yesh, contemplating that the very yesh of our existence is nullified before God, and therefore that we should align ourselves totally to godliness, even the yesh, and not focus on any of the negatives. Close our eyes, seal our eyes, our heart, our thoughts from anything that is opposite of what God is, of God wants or God is. V'hainu, this bittul, this means the bittul shemitzad koyach hachochma shebenefesh. This is a bittul that comes ready, the koyach hachochma of nefesh. B'chinas kfiya b'poil lichbesh kol ritzenesov. This is already a kfiya that you're overpowering. Kfiya means to force. Lichbesh, to conquer all his desires, that the desires should be only aligned to God. In other words, Echad is not focusing on the animal soul of the yesh. Nafshecho, b'chol nafshecho is, and aligning that as well to the divine.
So this is a vanity.
He doesn't say that. I used the example before just to explain something. He doesn't say the first is tzaddik, because everyone says, all of us say Echad and b'chol nafshecho and Shema every day. So clearly we have these two levels. All of us have these two levels to some extent. Valkain, and that's why b'chol nafshecho who I feel innateless nafshecho. Like I mentioned before, that's why he says b'chol nafshecho means with all your soul, with all your spirit. Even if your nafshecho is taken, you also dedicate yourself, because innateless nafshecho, because you're giving away, you're sacrificing something here. Shazein Mesiras Nefesh, this is the level of Mesiras Nefesh. Liyez shazo abitl b'chinas hanochas atzmusei. This is why is it called Mesiras Nefesh here? Not total absorption in the etzem, but because it's a bitl of putting yourself hanochas atzmusei, completely putting yourself aside and being completely devoted to God and not to your own desires. That's the distinction. V'harizeh. And this b'chol nafshecha, remember, comes after we say b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. L'maylim b'chol levavcha. It's higher than the b'chol levavcha which precedes it. Shezeu gam ken bitla yesh, B'chol levavcha is also bitla yesh. Avalei b'mesiras nefesh. B'chol levavcha means to love God with all your heart and with both parts of your heart. The Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer, that's levavcha. Shnei Yetzerecha. But that's a bitla yesh, but not mesiras nefesh. Ki'im mashaboya dehadas v'hasaga. That's more commensurate to what comes through your contemplation. It's a logical, it's a rational conclusion. So it's ayidea das v'hasaga shu habitl the derech kfir levad. There, it's only kfir. Even though he used that word also by b'chol nafshecho, but he's going to explain the difference. There, it's only kfir. So basically, you're coming to a logical conclusion that what's more important in life, to give into your own desires or to godliness, that God is more important, superior. So you compel and say, I'm going to follow that. It means it's a asuya means that it's a acquired ava. It's not a natural love. It's acquired asuya. Through this contemplation, you come to a love for godliness. Says to look in Tataah and the Maimer Zocher Amalek. Mashenkin b'chol nafshecha is higher than that. Hubchinis Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh. You're giving away your nefesh. Tahainu Mesiras Haratzenis. Means you're giving away your whole rotzen. It's like a total dedication. We have to explain the difference between all these three levels. Echad, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol levavcha. But let's just read the language and then we'll discuss it. Mesiras Haratzenis. You're giving away your Haratzenis. The obvious distinction would be that by b'chol levavcha, it's like a soldier who's not completely committed, but since he's in the military, he has to do what he's told. Whereas b'chol nafshecha, that's b'chol levavcha. B'chol nafshecha is a totally dedicated soldier. 24/7 is completely dedicated, but it's still a being that's dedicated. Echad is not about you altogether. It's about the divine being absorbed in the etzem itself. Actually, echad without b'chol nafshecha could also not necessarily lead you to avodah because you're completely absorbed in the etzem. So we're talking here in the yesh itself, the difference between b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. B'chol levavcha is a lower level of devotion that's more through contemplation al pi seichel. The second thing he said, it's ava asuya, it's acquired love, which means it's not natural, not part and parcel of the person. And finally, he said that it's b'derech kfir. You're forcing it for. Whereas b'chol levav nafshecha, there's also kfir, but it's a complete devotion. He gives away all his ritzenos. That's why it's called Mesiras Nefesh, not just b'chol levavcha with all your heart. You could love something with all your heart, but it doesn't mean you're ready for Mesiras Nefesh. And b'chol nafshecha is total Mesiras Nefesh. V'zeu shenimshech ha'idei hashvatim. And that's the difference. Echad comes through the Avos. And this second level, Chol Nafshecha, that's what comes through the Shevatim. That's the difference between the Avos and the Shevatim in Aveda. He's going to bring it back to the Merkavah, but that I'll leave for the next class. So that sums up what we've learned, is now we added the Shevatim, comparing the Shevatim and the Avos, two levels of bittul, one that allows it to come down to us more on our level, which is the Shevatim, and Naveda, the difference between Mesiras Nefesh of Echad, which is Mesiras Nefesh, the complete absorption in Atzmus, and Mesiras Nefesh B'chol Nafshecha, which is more bitla yesh, that the yesh itself recognizes how nullified it is. And L'chol Levavcha is a lower dimension than that as well, that he mentioned in this discussion. Okay. So I'm going to stop here, but let me take some questions. Yeah. If there are any questions.
And from a Valapatisha standpoint, from Chassidus applied, you're I don't know. I think you're suggesting, maybe the Rabbi Rashab's intimating, that we all have these different aspects of channeling Elokus to one degree of intensity or another. Is that
because since we say Shema and B'chol Nafshecha, all of us do. that's clear that there's two levels that each of us can attain relative, everyone relative.
But even the bittul of the Shevatim, which is Mesiras Nefesh, it's a lower type of Mesiras Nefesh. We have that as well. That basically the kfiyah, just you're yielding, you still feel the yesh, but Tzvi tossed out, it's a Beinoni. She doesn't say it here, but the point is that's a more common. It's hard to reach these higher levels, but at least to have control over the yesh so that it yields to the Elokus, the higher aspirations.
Well, look, these are two levels in Avodah, Avos and Shevatim. We receive the strength from both of them, meaning relative to ourselves, we have these two levels within us as well. Obviously, every person is different, so every person has to translate to their own personal life how the Shevatim is within their lives and how the Avos are within their lives. Everything is relative.
Yeah.
But yes, each of us can reach these levels. To translate for yourself, you have to look at where you are and where you could somewhere experience each one of these. Look, everything is relative. We spoke about this many times. Yom Kippur, for example, is the Gili of Yehuda. The high priest goes into the Holy of Holies. You could imagine the high priest in the Holy of Holies of a Rebbe or of a very advanced chassid is different than the going into the Holy of Holies for the rest of us. So it's all relative. What you have to find is how to translate these levels that he's describing here to each of us personally. You can find examples. You can find examples of the Avos, when a person feels that total absorption is something completely beyond. And then there's the other level, which is B'chol Nafshecho, which is, yes, you said earlier that not every Neshamas can go only to the Avos. That's not all the Neshamas. That's why you have the Shevatim. That's more of a level of Bit Layesh. But the translation to each of us individually, I didn't do here in this class. That's already something that needs further discussion. And also, fact is, we're all different. So everybody has to find their personal application of this. But the bottom line is that this is the formula. Now we have to translate that formula to ourselves, each in our own situation.
Thank you.
The difference is one is total absorption and seeing Yichuda Ilaah, and one is Yichuda Tataah. Of course, Yichuda Ilaah is not for most of us all the time, but every one of us can have a taste of it. That's why we say Hashem Echad. If it was exclusively only for the high level tzaddikim or something, then we wouldn't be told to say it. The fact that we say it tells us that it's something we all can attain relative to ourselves, even the Avos. That's what I'm saying.
Understood. Thank you very much. Very clear.
The Merkavah the Ilaah, Merkavah the Tataah. Is there any? We always speak about the Merkavah of Cheskel, Penei Arya, Penei Shor. Is there a place in Tanakh or any of the Nevi'im that they have a vision of these two higher ones of just where the Merkavahs are the Shevatim and the Merkavahs are the Avos? And is there any place that talks about that in Tanakh? Those two Merkavahs. And finally, my question about that is also who sits on top of these Merkavahs? Who's sitting on top of the Merkavah of the Avos? Assuming they're like
it's always what's called the. So first of all, regarding your first question, you have to research it. You have to research a little, look in Erech, in Sefer Likutim, Erech Merkavah, and see with original sources from Merkavah Tataah, Merkavah Ilaah for sure, and Zohar, that's for sure. Probably other places as well, and see how the Zohar, all the sources, where it originates from, and see if there's ever a vision of it. Either there is or there isn't. I'm not sure. I would begin, even in here in Ayin Beis, I mentioned to go back to the page, to page 1425, where he brings these two levels, and he actually compares it with the Malachim. And also, we're going to learn about it tomorrow in the next class. The next section, he's going to also compare the Merkavah and Bri Yetzirah to these Merkavah Tataah and Ilaah. So here's one place. Regarding the second question, Merkavah is a vehicle to godliness. The Adam Elyon is the one that sits on the chariot. Like a chariot is the king rides in the chariot. Who's the king? The king is God, but God as he manifests what we call Adam Elyon. So we've learned a number of times, there's the Adam Atzilus, Adam de Bria, Adam de Yitzira, Adam de Asiya. In every world, there's a Sir Adam. We're created in the divine image, that's the Adam Lamata. So there's the Adam Elyon as he manifests in Atzilus, and that's where the Avos of Atzilus are the Merkavah to that. There's the divine Adam, so to speak, as he manifests in Bria. There's the divine Adam as he manifests. That's the 10 spheres. Remember, there's 10 spheres in each of the worlds. The 10 spheres are like 10 faculties, the 10 attributes. But it's the same 10 spheres, just different levels. So the same attributes from Chachma through Malchus. In Atzilus, this is Chachma Malchus in Bria. The Merkavah are the levels in that world that serve as a vehicle to help to channel or help draw that level downward. That's what the role of a Merkavah is, to be a vehicle. Exactly that, a vehicle that carries that level and allows it to be drawn down to the lower levels. That's the journey of the Merkavah. So each level according to its level. Okay.
Yeah. Also, we learned yesterday that the Arya, the Gabriel and Michoel are the Arya. The Michoel comes from the Arya, and Gabriel comes from the shore. Well, you would think that the lion, which is a carnivorous animal, that the king of the jungle, so to speak, it would be Gabriel would be nostalgic from that, and it would be the opposite. The shore, which is a domesticated animal and one that we use for carbonos and kosher, that would be Michoel, and Gabriel would be the Arya, but it's the opposite. I was just wondering if there's any discussion about that. It struck me pretty profound.
Well, Chassidus talks about this as well. You could ask a further question. A lion is a non-kosher animal and a sher is a kosher animal. So how could the Aryeh in the Merkavah be such a high level when it's non-kosher down below? So the general answer is that the way it evolves down below doesn't necessarily mean that above is the same thing. The Aryeh, because it comes from such a high level of chesed, that's why it comes down lower than the sher in the sense of being, as you said, a predator, and as well as non-kosher. But in the root, Aryeh is a level of chesed. So Chassidus explains, and Kabbalah explains, I would suggest looking in Erech Aryeh in the same place, say for the Kutim. It talks about it at length in a number of Maimorim of how Aryeh is chesed and why Sher is Gvura. There's sources for it and also their personality. Aryeh may be a predator when it's hunting, but it's extremely kind and chesed to its own, to its own. A Sher is not necessarily. A Sher is also a Sher Shanogach. But look it up. It's not really a discussion here, but this is, the Rebbe Rashab is simply quoting what it says. He's not his chiddush about Aryeh and Sher. Basically, Aryeh is chesed, Sher is gvura, Nesher is rachamim. The eagle is rachamim, chesed gvura teferes. As I said, I would look it up there. There's a lot on this topic. Remember also the month of Aryeh is also the month of Leo. And there's the expression, Aryeh Shog Mila Yira, that Aryeh sometimes refers to the Eibishter and refers to the Beis Hamikdash. So Aryeh is, we also know that the fire that came down the Mizbeach was in the shape of a lion. So there's a lot on this topic.
Thank you. And one more last question, if I may. We learned that at Atzilus, there was certain times that there was a revelation of the highest levels of Atzilus into the world, like the time of Matan Torah, the Rebbe brings down, and then in the time of Beis Hamikdash and Rishon. My question is that at the time of Matan Torah, you could understand that we were all kulam ba'achdus, we're neged ahar, we're all there, and what the what the Shifcha saw was higher than any Nebuah. It was obvious that there was a level of Atzilus brought down into this world at that time. When it says Bizmana Beis Hamikdash Rishon, I could understand where it would say there was a Gilui of Atzilus in the Beis Hamikdash itself, like inside Kodesh Kodeshim, Amida and the fire coming down, the 10 miracles. But if you say, the Rebbe said, and I looked it over in a few places, clearly the Rebbe says Bizmana Beis Hamikdash. Well, at the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, there was tremendous amount of Pirud. The Shevatim were divided to 2 kingdoms. There was all this Avodah Zarah going on. How is the Rebbe saying that in this Zman Beis Hamikdash, there was a Atzilus revealed in this world when there was so many negativities going on, so to speak?
Well, first of all, it's not a question on Ayin Beis. This is a common discussion in many Maimorei Chazal and the Midrashim, even not in Pnimis HaTorah, that talk about the Bayis Rishon in the highest terms, what kind of high revelation was then. And in general terms, yes, it's compared to Matan Torah in that sense. Secondly, look in the Chumash, there was Matan Torah. 39 days later, they built the ultimate Avodah Zarah. It's called the Egel Hazav. Those same people that stood at Matan Torah. So the time of Matan Torah was not exactly also perfect, and there was plenty of rebellion against Moshe, Korach, and others. So the time of that period was not, yes, that moment when they received the Torah, there was a deep thing. There were moments, I am sure, in the Beis Rishon where all the Jews stood in awe and bittul and so on. But overall, the people did a lot of bad things, including Avodah Zarah, including last week's Parsha, Zimri. The whole Chumash is filled with plenty of stuff that I don't know if Beis Rishon would be. So whatever question you have on Beis Rishon, you could also ask in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the answer is correct. That is a revelation from above. That time, it wasn't just in the Beis Hamikdash, it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, in the time of Matan Torah. But at the end of the day, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and Matan Torah's effect did not last. In Gili, all the Jews in the Midbar died. They all rebelled with the Mechet HaMeraglim, and they ended up not even going into Eretz Yisrael, because both of them were coming from above, and ultimately was not integrated. That's why we have this hard avodah on these thousands of years of Golus. When Mashiach and the Geula come, it'll be a Bayis Nitzchi, a binyan adayar, it'll be a Bayis Nitzchi, Migdash Adnei Kaini Yadecha, that will last forever. So, in other Maimorim, it does explain the differences between Matan Torah and Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. Here, he's bringing the Maimorim that he's talking the general. He's talking about the highest points of revelation in history was Matan Torah and Bayis Rishon. So he's not going into the differences. But if you start breaking it down, both of them, the people were far from where they should be. Everything relative again,
And will the Rebbe in tomorrow's lesson tell us why we need the Shevatim versus the Malachim, the difference between those two? Is he going to the Hamshacha?
Well, he's already said that the Shevatim are higher than the Malachim, but I think we have to finish learning yet before we really understand. I mean, at the end of the day, we need them all. The fact is, everything we're learning here, we need the Avos, we need the Shevatim, we need the Malachim, we need also Moshe and Yeshua. Every one of the personalities in Torah and throughout all the levels of Seder Shtalshus play a critical role in our Avodah. That's the whole point. This whole thing is all here to help us. And it's not one that covers it all. As I said, we can use all the help we can get. And it's just the difference, what levels are you getting? There's levels of Atzilus, levels of Bria. I mentioned before, it's important to have, when you say Aseh Lecha Rav, the Knei Lecha Chaver. Why do you need both? Why do you need both? Because a Rav gives you a certain authority. A Chaver is more advice. But on the other hand, a Chaver is closer to you, can identify more with your issues. And a Rav is more apart from you. So if you think practically and not mathematically and mechanics, you'll see how every level is necessary in our Avodah. That's what it comes down to. Each one serves a different role, just like we need Chochmah, and we need Ba'abina, and Das, and Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Each one plays a critical role. The truth is, all events in history, from the beginning, from Adam HaRishon, all the way till today, they all play a role in helping us do what we have to do. So at the end of the day, each one plays a different role. The lower the level it is, the more it's commensurate to us. That's the quality. The higher the level, the higher revelation it gives you, but it's not so integrated within us. That's why these memutzayim are so critical. He's going to continue. This is not over yet. Bottom line, you have to understand the whole Seder Shtalshus was given to us as a gift of stepping stones, as I point out many times, to interface between a very raw, mundane, selfish existence and a divine that's completely beyond us. How can you interface two such diametric opposites? So the more stepping stones we have, the better it is. It's like climbing a ladder. You'll say, what do I need all the rungs on the ladder? Why can't I just have 2 rungs? You can't, because you can't jump that high. And you want it to be in a way that's commensurate step by step by step. It's the basic respect of structure. I mentioned it many times. Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel. We're born as newborns, and then comes Ben Chamash Lemikra when you're 5, Ben Esel Lemishna when you're 10, Ben Chamesh Esel Gemara, Ben Esel Lekayach, and so on and so forth. Ben Shemin Esel Lechuppah. Why can't we just jump to have all the wisdom and of a sage at 80? Because that's the way the structure of existence is. We'd all love to be able to do that, but it doesn't work that way. So Seder Shtalshus and all these levels are essentially the same concept. These are rungs for us to be able to access, to help us move to the next level. And as you move to the next level, then you need further help and further support. But it is your neshama that's doing it. I mean, it's like asking a question, why do all the different friends and all the different rabbis and all the different teachers I've met in my life, why do I need them all? I'm talking about the ones that were productive for you. You'll see each one added something. This one added some knowledge. This one added an example. This one was a role model. This one you go to for advice. So they all added together. This is called a support system. This is the cosmic support system that we're learning here. And it goes through all of them. Avos, Shevatim, Malachim, and each Malach in its own way. And that's why we say in Birchis Yetzer, the Fanim, the Chayes HaKodesh, and the Umas HaSrofim, the Srofim, Matat, and the rest of the levels. That's really what he's putting together here. Now we understand the Pasuk Hine and Echad when Hashem sends a Malach, the meaning of a Malach and the significance. Okay?
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for those answers. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, so we'll stop here by Yesh Leimer, close to the bottom of page 1449. We'll continue tomorrow. We'll continue. It's going nice and smooth. Yeah.